On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we are halfway there, but this Minnesota Wild team is not living on a prayer. Who's been the biggest surprise for the Minnesota Wild through the first half of the season?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we recap a flurry of roster moves today, as now some question marks as to whether or not Brock Faber is going to be able to go against the Avs. We'll obviously get more information tomorrow, but we'll talk about all the roster moves that were made, and we're going to dive in to try to figure out who the biggest surprise of the first half of the season is. There have been a few worthy candidates so far, to say the least, and so we'll try to figure out who has had the most impressive start to the season for this Minnesota Wild team. We are at the halfway point, 41 games into the season, and the Minnesota Wild find themselves where they've been for a majority of the season, just behind the Winnipeg Jets. And through the first 41 games of the season, the Minnesota Wild record sits at 26-11-4. They have 56 points in 41 games. And have been the road warriors of the league pretty much all season, 15-3-3 so far. And with one game in hand, the Wild find themselves 2 points behind the Winnipeg Jets. The Dallas Stars currently in third in the Central Division, or Colorado, depending on who. They both have 51 points. And the Stars have a couple of games in hand on the Minnesota Wild. But it's a Minnesota team that I think the best way to illustrate what the Wild have done so far this season is the Wild are currently 6-1 without Kirill Kaprizov in the lineup, which even as recent as last year, you would think would have been impossible, because it's no secret that at points this Minnesota Wild team struggles to find players that can score goals that are not named Kirill Kaprizov. There was a stretch earlier this season where Kaprizov was on the ice for 14 straight goals, which meant that the Wild did not have a goal that did not have Kirill Kaprizov at least on the ice for 14 straight. And it got to be a little bit of a concern. And then Kirill goes out as he continues to rest and try to kind of build himself back up to being able to skate. And everybody is stepping up to put the puck in the net. And you've got a viable number one option in Marco Rossi, who has taken over. But you've got strong secondary candidates. You got Matt Boldy, you got Matt Zuccarello, and you got just a bunch of other players that have chipped in and contributed to help this team get to where they're currently at right now. And, halfway through the season now, I think we kind of have been waiting to see if this was going to be sustainable or if this was going to be a hot start for the sake of not having the same thing happen that happened last year. But they just keep winning games. The Wild keep finding ways to win games. They keep finding ways to offset critical losses in the lineup. And it just seems at this point like no obstacle is too big for this Wild team. And we talked in the postcast last night. I know the wins against the top contenders in the West have been sparse, but the bounce backs have been there and have been quite evident. And of any Minnesota Wild team over the last several seasons, this one seems most equipped to be able to handle the ebbs and flows of a playoff series because of how they operate and the mentality that they play with and just how they how they conduct themselves over the course of games and seasons. Things don't go well all the time, but the Wild always seem to find a way. And I just find it funny that of all the teams currently in the Western Conference playoff picture, only the Winnipeg Jets, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Vancouver Canucks, those are the only three that are not on winning streaks of at least 3 games. So, continuing to bank points, and once Kirill is ready to return, you would think that's going to deepen the lineup even more. The defense has been able to hold their own despite now having Jared Spurgeon out of the lineup, and now it looks like Brock Faber for at least a game. Team just continues to say, adversity, schmadversity. We just are going to keep winning hockey games. So, by and large, if we talk about biggest surprises and most impressive feats, I think just the fact that the Wild have gotten to this point in the season and are still going neck and neck with the best team in the West, the Winnipeg Jets, and the Vegas Golden Knights, they're right there from a points perspective with both of those teams. Now, we'll talk later in the show about surprises and most impressive starts to the season, most impressive players, things along that line. But there is some injury news to discuss relating to tomorrow's game against the Colorado Avalanche. And Michael Russo, as he always does, just lays it out pretty succinctly. He tweeted earlier today, Brock Faber is injured, upper body injury. He obviously left the game against the Blues in the first period and did not return and was quickly ruled out for the rest of the game. There was a little bit of detective work being done by many to try to figure out what exactly was the cause of Faber's injury. And as far as can be told, early on in the game, Faber took an elbow up high from Jake Neighbors and was a little slow to the bench after that. He came out for an additional shift afterwards, but was pretty tentative out on the ice. And so he was skated off the ice, and that was that. Would explain why it seemed like multiple Wild players were chomping at the bit to get a piece of Jake Neighbors as the game wore on. But upper body injury, that is the extent that we know at this point, and I'm sure we'll find out a little more tomorrow. David Jiricek was recalled under emergency conditions. The Wild are right up against the cap again because Jake Middleton came off LTIR. So Jakub Lauko was placed on long-term injured reserve to allow for the Jiricek call-up. Lauko can still technically be recalled, can come off LTIR after 4 p.m. tomorrow if he's ready, because he has been skating and getting some practices under his belt. It doesn't change Lauko's timeline at all because of the amount of time that he has missed, and going from that same retroactive date of when he was placed on injured reserve, he still has missed enough games and enough days to qualify for both injured reserve and long-term injured reserve. So if Faber's able to play, and then you could theoretically get Lauko off LTIR tomorrow, still an option. Jiricek can be converted to a regular recall and play if Faber can't, or if there are other illnesses or injuries. Oh, and Liam Ogren was announced today as an AHL All-Star. So a lot of news to recap. At least there's a little cherry on top with Liam Ogren making the AHL All-Star team. So congratulations to Liam for that. But the hits just keep on coming. One player in, one player out has been the rule for the Minnesota Wild so far this season. And Jake Middleton comes back in, and now looks like Brock Faber may at least miss a game. I'm not a doctor, So I'm not going to speculate as to what the injury is for Faber, but you can kind of connect the dots. Takes an elbow up high and is ruled out later in the game. So I guess we'll just wait and see if he's ready to go tomorrow against the Colorado Avalanche. Would sure be nice to have him in that game, but we'll see. I want to spend a bulk of the show today talking about the biggest surprises for this Minnesota Wild team so far this season, because there have been plenty, and we will dive into that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. The Minnesota Vikings opened at 2.5-point favorites against the Los Angeles Rams on the road. That'll be a Monday night game. So you could double dip and go with the Minnesota Vikings to cover. Also take Jordan Addison to score in any game touchdown, anytime touchdown. Maybe you think Justin Jefferson will score the first touchdown of the game. All of these options exist to you, and if you throw $5 down, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We will have a postcast for you tomorrow night after the game against the Avs. And what I'm going to start doing is pre-scheduling postcasts. So just look for, and it'll be clearly marked postcast. Just look for those. We'll have those scheduled early on in the day. Just so that there's no guessing as to, are we going to have one? Are we not going to have one? And then on nights where there are games, where I have games and maybe not getting back until right at the time that the game ends, we'll just hop in and get going whenever I'm able to. So we will have one tomorrow night. A pretty big game coming up against the Colorado Avalanche. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. We'll also take a look at the rest of the January schedule with Zach Zeman for tomorrow's episode. So we have plenty coming up for you here over the course of the next few days. Let's talk about the most pleasant surprises, biggest surprises through the first half of the season. There have been quite a few, including the Minnesota Wild in general. I don't think anybody expected that the Minnesota Wild were going to be in the second spot in the Central. And for a few days at least, pacing the entirety of the NHL in points earlier this season. They started 17-4-4, and then the injuries hit, but the Wild have basically been 500 since. So that great start to the season afforded them some time to just kind of tread water, essentially. And all sorts of wins against impressive Eastern Conference opponents. They went into Florida and beat the Panthers and the Lightning in succession earlier in the season. They beat the Dallas Stars to snap that long stretch of winless games against the Stars. It's been an impressive season for the Minnesota Wild so far, and it speaks to, I think, the resilience of this team. There is no obstacle that's too big. There is no adversity that is too much to overcome for this Minnesota Wild team. And John Hynes has drilled that into this roster, mindset and mentality, and they have been fearless and have been up to the task every single game so far this season. So that's a credit to the work that Hynes has done with his coaching staff of getting this team ready to play this year to avoid as slow of a start as they had last year. And as of right now, they're the 2 seed in the Central, and it feels like with as much success as they've had on the road that even if they would fall to the 3, that they could go into an opposing environment and be able to come away with a win in one of the first 2 games of the series. So it's been a very impressive start to the year for the Minnesota Wild, but there have been plenty of impressive performances so far this season. And I want to start with both of the goalies. Then we'll talk about the forwards in general to kind of finish the show. But not only have the Wild gotten some just excellent games from Filip Gustavsson. I know he did get pulled in the game against the St. Louis Blues. It wasn't an injury or anything. Just wasn't his night. And that's going to happen over the course of the season. Still is 18-6-3 with a 2.31 goals against average and a .922 save percentage so far this season. It has been a return to form for Filip Gustavsson every step of the way so far this season. And some of his most impressive games, I mean, going into Carolina in his most recent start before St. Louis, going into Carolina and shutting out the Hurricanes in their barn, come on. It does not get any better than that. Also outdueling Jake Ottinger in overtime on December 27th in Dallas, in which he gave up 2 goals on 29 shots. Some others went in and twirled a 39-save shutout against Buffalo on November 27th. And even in losses, came up just short against the Dallas Stars early on in the season. Stopped 38 of 40 against the Stars in an early contest. And gave up just 1 goal against the Panthers. He's been great pretty much all season. He has a goal also against the St. Louis Blues in his 3rd start of the season. So he's been just great. Gustavsson has been fantastic all season. And not only has he been good to anchor the goalie rotation, we got to give some love to Marc-Andre Fleury too. Coming in relief in the game against the Blues and stopping every shot that he faced to allow the Wild to come back and win that game. 8-3-1 on the season himself with a 2.67 goals against average and a .922 save percentage at the age of 40. Still getting it done. Still coming away with, even in losses, quality performances that just come up short, especially back when the team was struggling to score goals. Has wins against Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, Edmonton, Philly, Washington in a shootout in his most recent start. Fleury has been very good as a backup for this team, and that's not an easy role to have, but he has done well in those situations and has accepted that at this stage in his career, that's the role that he has. And he has, he's kept the room light. He's a huge piece. He's a huge vibes piece for this team, but it's not like that's all he's contributing. He's still doing a very good job of helping keep this team in contention. And, has had some just solid months to start the season for the Wild so far this year. So the goalie room, I think, has been a huge surprise for this Minnesota Wild team because it was very streaky last year. It was up, it was down. Seemed like a good month followed by a bad month was the only consistent thing that we could see from the team. And now this year, it's like they just stack quality performances on top of each other. But I think the defense is another very impressive part of what this team has done so far this year. In the top, they were in the top 5 at last check in terms of 5-on-5 goals against so far this season. Just continuing to pace the league. They're 4th in the league in 5-on-5 goals against, with 65 goals against in 41 games. The only teams that have fewer are Winnipeg, Calgary, and the Los Angeles Kings. So it's a defense that has taken over games. As impressive as Filip Gustavsson's performance was against Carolina, the defense limiting that Hurricanes team to 21 shots was equally as impressive. And they do this without key pieces in the lineup. With Jared Spurgeon out of the lineup now, with Jake Middleton out of the lineup previously, they just continue to get it done. It doesn't matter who's in the lineup. They just continue to get it done. And I think that is the mantra for this team, has been just get it done, no matter what it takes. And they have been very good at that all season long. So from a team perspective, those are two of the biggest impressive pieces of this. Obviously, the penalty kill is still the penalty kill, and that's going to have to be addressed at some point. So 41 games to get that ironed out. It has been better recently, so progress, but still there's some work to be done to get that unit firing on all cylinders by the time the season gets done. Let's talk about individual player performances so far this year. We just had the Golden Globes. I didn't watch. I'm not big on awards shows, but it is awards season, so we're going to hand out the nominees for biggest surprise in the first half for the Minnesota Wild when we come back on today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by GameTime. I love going to live events, whether it's your favorite sports team, a concert, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending the Kenny Chesney concert at US Bank Stadium a few years ago. But it's hard to beat going to see your favorite team in action any night of the week. It doesn't matter who's playing or when. GameTime can help make your favorite sports memories happen. And now GameTime has made it easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, GameTime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. It is just such a nice feature. I was looking for some concert tickets for later this summer. And it's nice to know up front what I'm going to be paying as opposed to getting surprised at checkout with those hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? It's game time. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We'll take a look at the rest of the January schedule tomorrow, and we'll also take a look at the Colorado Avalanche, because it turns out the Avs just needed to get their goalie situation figured out for them to finally start clicking this season. They have been white hot over the last 10 games at 8-1-1. In their last 10, they're making their push at this point in the season. But I wanted to go through the nominees for most impressive start to the season, biggest surprise, the biggest surprise player of the first half of the 2024-2025 season. And the nominees. Number one is Marco Rossi. 15 goals, 37 points in 41 games so far, and he has stepped his performance up considerably. In the absence of Kirill Kaprizov, he's taken the lead and has become the go-to option for this team with the key superstar, Kaprizov, out of the lineup. So Marco Rossi is definitely a nominee for the most impressive start to the season through the first half of games. Also nominated, Jake Middleton. Before he got hurt, Middleton was on pace for a career year, just on pace to shatter every record that he previously held. He's got 6 goals already this year. He's got 15 points in 30 games, was blocking shots left, right, and center, and was playing good defense before getting hurt. Now, he got into form against the Blues in his first game back, but obviously missed a good chunk of games. But still, a very great performance from Middleton to start off the season. And he's got to be a nominee, to say the least, for this consideration. Obviously, we're going to put Filip Gustavsson in the consideration as well. One of the best statistical goalies in the entire NHL so far this season. So you got to put him in there as well. Also going to nominate Mats Zuccarello. I know he's missed games this year. He missed a bunch of games due to one of the most unfortunate injuries that a player could possibly undergo. Required some surgery. Everybody knows what it is. I don't have to repeat it. But Zuccarello already has eclipsed his goals from last season. He's got 10 goals through 28 games played and 27 points in the 28 games played. And last season for Zuccarello, he got to 12 goals through 69 games. So I think he is a pretty good bet to be able to beat that this season. So Zuccarello, I think, has definitely been impressive to start the year. So I'm going to nominate him as well. And final nominee that I will put in, there will certainly be honorable mentions, but final nominee that I will put in for most impressive start to the season through the first half, I'm going to put in Freddie Gaudreau. Gaudreau has already eclipsed his goals from last year, his points from last year, and has really helped solidify the third line as a defensive force for this team. He's winning faceoffs all the time. And I think Freddie Gaudreau certainly deserves some love for his early season performance, and went on a nice run after about 10, 20 games, and has just been a consistent contributor so far this season for the Minnesota Wild. So those are your nominees for most impressive player in the first half of the season. And the award goes to Marco Rossi. It's got to be Marco Rossi. I mean, I know everybody expected that he was going to come in and have a good start to the season. Like, after what he did last year, the expectation was that he was going to take a step up from that and was going to continue to become a nice player for the Minnesota Wild here this season. But Marco Rossi has not just taken a step, he has taken a leap in his overall production, in his overall play. Every metric, he has taken massive strides so far this season. He's a plus 17 so far this year. He is on pace to cut his penalty minutes in half from last year. He had 47 penalty minutes last year. He has 12 in 41 games so far this year. In terms of blocks, he's on pace to eclipse his previous career high. Hits, he's on pace to eclipse his previous career high. It just every mark, and then that's not even taking into consideration what he's doing offensively, which is second on the team in goals and points, on pace for a 30-goal, 74-point campaign. Oh, and he's winning faceoffs at a 48.6% clip. Up until the last couple of games, he was one faceoff loss below 50%, even in the faceoff circle. So there is no way to slice it other than that Marco Rossi has been just a fantastic piece of this team and has to be the biggest surprise for this Minnesota Wild team so far this season. There's no question that he has staying power as a top line guy, and depending on the moves that this team makes, he's at worst a top 6 center. He's at worst a second line center, but he's been playing with Kaprizov, with Zuccarello on that top line, and the numbers have been great. So he is showing that he is capable of handling that. A career high in minutes. He's shooting 20.3%. And he just goes to the net and he scores goals. So Marco Rossi is your most impressive player in the first half of the season for the Minnesota Wild, according to the Locked On Wild Awards Committee. Let me know if we got it right. Let me know if somebody else should have been handed that award. Let me know in the comments. What has surprised you most about this Minnesota Wild team through the first half of the season? It can be a player. It can be a portion of this team, a unit, offense, defense, special teams. Let me know what has surprised you the most about what this Minnesota Wild team has done so far this season. And we will see you tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Wild. Before you go, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.